Hello, everyone. Yeah, so I'll be presenting on the topic experimentation and product management. I mentioned this as part one. I hope if there is more interest in this topic, so we can have further parts for this session as well. So, as product managers, we focus a lot on inventing and doing things which we are not sure about. And the only way that we can leap into the unknown or do things which are not sure about is by experimenting. And our very famous product manager, Jeff Bezos, also agrees with us. So, so in terms of, so what will be the ROI of spending your next 30 minutes on this session? What will be the key takeaways that you can that you can benefit by listening to this session in the next 30 minutes? Uh, First, so as a PM, why should you run experiments? Why not just launch features? So the key takeaway for you would be, why should I as a PM run experiments? And how long should I run experiments for? One of the biggest costs for running experiments is the time it takes to reach a scientifically valid conclusion. So I will lay stress and help you realize and understand how long you should run experiments for to reach a valid conclusion. And then once you have got some numbers, you've got some metrics, how should you interpret those results and take low risk decisions? So let's jump straight away into the session, and hopefully you will spend the next 30 minutes of your time into something meaningful. So first, why do we run experiments? Um, as a premise, I assume most of you would have heard correlation is not causation. So we have heard this multiple times. What we see is that there is phenomena one and there is something as phenomena two. So you see that you have changed the color of your buy now button from blue to red. And you see that there is maybe an increase in conversions that has happened during that time. But can you confidently say that the increasing conversion has been caused only because of the change in color? There can be multiple other things that could have been happening at that point of time. So experimentation, running a scientifically valid experiment, is the only way through which you can establish causality with very high confidence and very high probability. So in order to establish a very clear reason of change, you need to run experiments. Another big reason for running experiments is to detect small changes. As you scale in product management, as you work on products which are being used by millions of users, it's very hard to detect small improvements. And running scientifically valid experiments is the only way to detect these small changes. And the third and often underestimated and underappreciated fact why you should run experiments is to detect surprising changes or side effects. So throughout my career, I have run many experiments where I have seen uh, some metrics to change, which I had never anticipated. I made some change in the search results page, and suddenly my category navigation page visits dropped. And ultimately, I dig deep and found it was actually a result because of my experiment. So there are a number of unexpected changes that can happen, and running valid scientific experiment is the only way to detect these unexpected changes. So now let's jump straight into the overall why. What is the scientific method, and how should we run these experiments valid in a scientific manner? So these are some basic steps. You should ask the right question, do some background research, and have a very clear hypothesis or idea about what you are going to change and what is going to impact. Then you test your hypothesis with an experiment, you analyze your data, and you make your decision. So these are some very basic valid steps that you should follow while running experiments. But the devil is in the details. So let's dive straight into the details. So I want to share this case study, which is an, a real life experiment that I ran during my experience in Snapdeal, and I won't be sharing the exact real numbers, but it will give you an idea about what I wanted to do and how should you run valid scientific experiments. So the insight that I had was that users who use suggested searches during searching converted 2.5x times more than users who do not. So there was a clear idea for us that if we increase the usage of auto-suggest, or we will be increasing our conversion rate, which is one of the primary KPIs that product managers care for. E-commerce product managers would do anything for getting improvements in conversion rates. So our hypothesis was introducing autocomplete for searches will improve auto-suggest usage. And then our null hypothesis, we introduce autocomplete for searches will have no impact on auto-suggest usage. Now, what is this null hypothesis? So in traditional hypothesis testing, we have this concept of null hypothesis, which is basically a way to say that whatever changes we make, assume there is a way to say that it will have no impact, no effect. And then what we do is we investigate whether this is true or not. In these times of COVID-19, we are hearing more and more about impacts of drugs and impacts of how drugs are being tested on various users. So the topic is most relevant at this point of time. So we have this null hypothesis, and we then investigate if this is true or not. So hypotheses are either right or wrong. So we either reject or accept the null hypothesis during a test. There can be a case of like inconclusive result as well, which we will cover in next session. We have to go into more details to cover that. So now I share with you some numbers. Product managers love numbers, so let's dig deep into this. So I've run this experiment for 3 days, and I have these numbers. So I have these 3 success metrics. I know for users who were in control, these are the numbers. Users who were in treatment, these are the metrics. And I have run it for 3 days. Should we take a decision and launch this to 100% of the users or not? Well, we don't have, what should we do? I believe, so at this point of time, there are 2 types of mistakes that we can make. We can either reject a true null hypothesis, or we can accept a false null hypothesis. In science statistics, these 2 errors are called as false positives or type 1 error, or false negatives or type 2 errors. How should we avoid these? So to avoid false positives, we have a concept called significance level. And in general scientific practice, we generally use 5% as the significance level. What it means is that if our null hypothesis is true, we would see a statistically significant result 1 in 20 times. So if we see a very significant result, we can say that it is a very surprising and significant change, and in that case, the change in the primary metric was caused by the change made by us. So we prove causality because of this, and that is one of the basic premise of running experiments. So how should we prove causality? How should we say that if our experiment had this significance level or not? So now, if I just have these numbers, I cannot say with confidence anything. So I give you some more information. So I introduced this concept of p-value, which is what indicates significance levels, and I tell you these values of the p-value, and delta is something which indicates what was the change in these metrics. So I tell you that there was this much change with a p-value of 2%, 3%, and 7%. And as we had studied earlier, we use the significance level of 5%. So any p-value less than 5% indicates that this change is statistically significant. That means we have detected a surprising change, and that proves that the delta impact has been caused due to the change that we made in autocomplete. So should we launch at this point of time? Well, we have detected that there is some effect in our target metrics, which has been caused by experiment. However, is this change of practical importance? Have we exposed this experiment to enough set of users? But do we know whether this delta is of practical importance or not, or whether this is too low, too high? We still have some level of uncertainty, some level of risk that is not acceptable in a scientifically valid experiment. So what should we do? So we have this another significance levels often forgotten when it comes to our rescue, which is the concept of power analysis. Power analysis limits false negatives. What it does, it helps us, the concept tells us that how long should you run an experiment on, and what should be the sample size or the number of users your experiment should be exposed to, so that you can be reasonably confident in the decisions that you make, and you are aware that the effect that you have seen with your experiment is of practical importance. We can go into some more details about what is power, why is it more important into the next session. But as of now, what I want to focus is that this concept of power analysis helps limit false negatives and improves our accuracy of our experiment decisions. So generally, we do this analysis before starting an experiment. We have this concept of a minimal detectable effect for a metric. We can choose any minimal detectable effect. We can use historical values of the effects that have been caused by those metrics. And then we do a power analysis, which gives us the required number of users our experiment should be exposed to get a state where our experiment is ready for decision. So now I tell you this value. We know the values of control and treatment. We know the delta. My experiment has run for 8 days, and I also have run my power analysis, and the power analysis indicates that my experiment is ready for decision. The p values are all less than 5%. So yes, hooray, we have reached the state for ready to launch. We have detected a real impact on our success metrics, and which can be safely assumed to have been caused by experiment. So we recommend running experiments for at least 7 days, or like one complete weekly cycle. So to also compensate for seasonal changes, because we have seen in most e-commerce as well as any digital platforms, traffic varies throughout the week. The types of users varies throughout the week. So a safe runtime period for an experiment is at least 7 days, a complete weekly cycle. You do a power analysis before starting an experiment, and you calculate p-values. So when you do all these calculations, you reach this state. Now your experiment is ready for a decision, and then you can, based upon the metrics that you see, you can either add for this experiment, these set of numbers, it's safe to say that we can ready to launch, and we can launch this feature to 100% of our users, and it's a success. But many times the numbers are not this good. They can be sometimes metrics increase, decrease. So we'll have to take decisions accordingly. But the concepts of calculating p-values, ready for decisions, are the same for all the experiments, and it's absolutely critical for running a scientifically valid experiment. So that's it. That's a summary. At Indeed, we make decisions through experiments. We run experiments to explore hypotheses, and I definitely recommend you to avoid these two types of errors by calculating p-values and doing power analysis and running the experiment for required duration. Just wanted to end this session by this statement, where my true belief is that experiments don't fail. Even if you decide not to roll out, all experiments teach us new things and is a success. So hopefully you like this session, you find this session valid and useful. And if yes, then there are some other details that we can cover up in a follow-up session later, where we can cover common biases to watch out for in experimentation, how to plan and run experiments effectively, what metrics to choose and not to choose for experiments, how to calculate confidence intervals, and how to take experiment decisions in case of inconclusive evidence. So thank you and happy experimenting.